Merian Caldwell Cooper was born in 1893 in Jacksonville, Florida. As a boy, he loved reading Kipling, Haggard, Shakespeare, and the Bible. A gift from an uncle, Paul Duchalou's book, Equatorial Africa, began Cooper's fascination with gorillas.
And the big centerpiece of that book, which was based on an expedition this explorer had made to Africa in like the 1840s, I believe, was this whole hunt for wild gorilla in Africa. And it fascinated Cooper as a kid. It made him want to be an explorer. And part of what was fascinating about that is it had the whole archetype of that ended up becoming part of the story of Kong.
A natural adventurer, he attended the Naval Academy at Annapolis.
Cooper came from a military family where his ancestors had all been guys that fought all these wars and were adventurers. And he was the kind of guy that would pick up a magazine or a newspaper and read something about a new kind of car, about an airplane, about being a merchant marine, about, traveling the world. And everything he read about, he wanted to try, he wanted to do. In a way, people thought he was kind of crazy because he was always trying all these new things, but he really, really loved exploration.
He was quite a guy. He was an executive as well as a creative personality, as well as a bright guy and an imaginative fellow.
In 1916, he helped pursue Pancho Villa in Mexico. During World War I, he served as a fighter pilot.
He was an amazing character. He was incredibly courageous. He was incredibly honorable. He was brave beyond belief.
He was also a huge risk taker. He wasn't afraid of heights. He wasn't afraid to get into a new kind of airplane. He wasn't afraid to cross an enemy line to take a picture even though people were shooting at him. So he really was kind of like this modern-day Carl Denham, who was the character that he was fashioned after.
Near the end of the war, Cooper was shot down over Germany.
On two separate occasions, it was reported that he'd been killed. And so his friends and family back in America twice had basically been confronted with the news that he was dead. And both times he managed to pull himself out of scrapes.
After his release from a German hospital, Cooper met Ernest Schoedsack for the first time in Vienna. A lifelong friendship was born. Cooper continued on to Poland, where he flew many more missions until he was shot down over Soviet territory.
The story became very grim at that point because if they had known who he was, he would have been killed instantly. He went under an assumed name and he managed to bluff his way through, but he survived 10 months in essentially concentration camps in Moscow.
After his daring escape and en route to America, Cooper stopped off in London, where he again ran into Ernest Schoedsack. Recognizing their shared passion for adventure, they discussed making action documentaries.
Schoedsack was 6'4.5". Of course, in those days, that was huge. And Cooper was a little guy. He was like 5'6". So they looked like Mutt and Jeff, and they were just the polarity. I mean, how they looked was like a total polarity, but they had this meshing of the minds as far as the spirit of adventure.
Ernest Beaumont Schoedsack was born in Iowa in 1893, the same year as Cooper. In his early teens, Schoedsack ran away from home to set out for California. By age 17, he was working as a cameraman for Mack Sennett Studios. During World War I, he filmed major battles for the U.S. Signal Corps and the Red Cross.
Schoedsack was shooting documentary footage throughout the war, captured some amazing stuff, always in danger.
Schoedsack as well had been in war zones for several years by the time they started making films, and he had survived with bombs and bullets and all those things.
It was the lanky 6'6" Schoedsack, the self-described strong silent type, who was the real-life model for King Kong's Jack Driscoll, first mate of the venture.
And the next thing you knew, they had talked the studios into allowing them to go into these kind of very strange, unexplored places and make movies.
As Cooper Schoedsack Productions, they were determined to distinguish themselves with exciting, stranger-than-fiction, true-life adventure documentaries, which they called natural drama.
The drama of people living in their real places, but you're telling a story, but yet you're capturing a reality as well.
They're sort of reporters with a pith helmet. You know, they went off and shot exotic things. And in fact, the Komodo dragons that that Cooper saw directly inspired the monsters in Kong.
Their motto?
Keep it distant, difficult, and dangerous.
I think a lot of people today are inspired by what they see on film and television. These guys weren't. These guys were inspired by what they saw in real life. I know Schoedsack and Cooper definitely brought their lifestyle to their film.
It was almost like he was looking for the most dangerous. It wasn't just good enough that there were tigers. They had to be man-eating tigers. And so he actually sought out these adventures.
Schoedsack had to do all of the camera work himself, and there were no long lenses. There was just your standard lens. And so when he's when in Chang you see the tiger, you know, with his face right up next to the camera, it really is right next to the camera. So it was a very brave men that were the models for Denham and Driscoll.
Chang would greatly influence King Kong. Whole scenes, characters, and incidents formed the dramatic backbone of Cooper and Schoedsack's epic fantasy. Ernest Schoedsack's wife, actress-turned-screenwriter Ruth Rose, whose first assignment would be King Kong.
She had never done a screenplay, but she had written a couple of things, and a couple of short stories, and a couple of articles on the exploration bit, because she had met Schoedsack when they were both off on a Lucius Beebe expedition.
It was aboard the Arcturus where Ruth Rose and Ernest Schoedsack fell in love, just like Jack Driscoll and Ann Darrow. Upon their return to New York, Ruth Rose married Ernest Schoedsack and became a member of the Cooper-Schoedsack team.
She was a very, very, very small, refined, kind of quiet lady. It was kind of funny because you wouldn't expect it. She was very tough, you know, and you just wouldn't expect from looking at her that that's the kind of person she was, which I also thought was really interesting and very creative.
Chang was an even bigger success than Grass. Cooper wasn't satisfied. He wanted greater popular success. They decided to try something new, combining a natural drama with studio production to adapt A.E.W. Mason's novel of African warfare, The Four Feathers. Ruth Rose Schoedsack proved invaluable to the team, doing whatever was required, from shooting film to running payroll, acting as nurse, even shooting a crocodile. While the Schoedsacks were still in the jungles, Cooper was back in New York dreaming up their next film, a story about a giant gorilla. Cooper was inspired by the tales of explorer Douglas Burden, who had brought back a once-thought mythical dragon lizard from the island of Komodo, only to see the giant predator quickly perish in civilization.
What he wanted to do was go to Africa and capture gorillas and then go to the Komodo Islands and have the gorillas fight these Komodo dragons and with miniature sets and things like that. And luckily, nobody allowed him to do that.
I think Cooper wanted to bring that into the story based on his own experience of having been out into the jungle and what that would be like to sort of go into these mysterious places. That's what his life, that's what his experiences were up to the point where he was being a producer.
And he became intrigued with this, and somehow he became intrigued with the idea of a giant gorilla being brought back to civilization. And this, of course, was a germinal idea that started in the very late 20s and a little bit in the early 30s, but he couldn't really get any interest in it from anybody because of the times. And although he had thoughts about them being on top of the largest building in New York, you know, and the airplanes bringing him, civilization bringing him down, you know, and so forth. And he also thought about this Beauty and the Beast concept that would fit in with this, you know.
Merian Cooper had his idea for a movie about a giant gorilla, but no way to visualize its star. Then, on a fateful day in 1931, he met Willis O'Brien.
Willis O'Brien is, in many respects, you know, the third of the major Kong players. I mean, beyond Merian Cooper and Ernest Schoedsack, the directors.
Willis O'Brien, I think, is one of the great unsung heroes of cinema.
He's not well known to the public, but to every special effects artist working in Hollywood for the past 50 years, he's been a very well-known name. And almost everyone you talk to got into special effects because they saw King Kong.
Willis O'Brien was not just sort of a screen magician, but really a pioneer because he was inventing something fundamental.
He was the first one in American cinema to experiment seriously with stop-motion photography.
Well, he was the authentic pioneer of visual effects films. He wrote the book on how to do these kinds of shots.
Willis O'Brien had a varied background. As a farmhand, cowboy, jockey, boxer, bartender, sculptor, and cartoonist.
He was certainly a formidable sketch artist, as his various surviving drawings will attest, and was sort of fooling around with a movie camera and clay figures and sort of invented for himself stop-motion animation.
He thought of it as a way to bring sculptures to life and just started experimenting and came up with these little comedies that Edison financed.
Thomas Edison, in addition to inventing the light bulb and phonograph, also invented the motion picture camera and was one of the first distributors of movies. He bought O'Brien's film, The Dinosaur and the Missing Link, in 1917 and ordered a series of stop-motion comedy shorts.
He was the first person really to present what became a technique that was used right the way through to the 1980s, early 1990s, stop-motion animation, puppet animation, as, you know, by far the most satisfying and beautiful way to realize monsters and dinosaurs on screen.
The Missing Link in one of O'Brien's earliest films does have a certain resemblance to Kong. He's slightly ape-like and has the longer arms. And he has a lot of attitude and presence. And so I think it's accurate to say he's a forerunner of Kong.
The technique that Willis O'Brien pioneered and developed more than anybody else at that period of time exploded into public consciousness with a movie called The Lost World in 1925. It was the adaptation of the Conan Doyle book of explorers finding a plateau in South America populated by dinosaurs. And Willis O'Brien and his crew created an extraordinarily huge number of dinosaur sequences, all through stop-motion animation.
Audiences in 1925 were astounded by The Lost World. Author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle stunned a convention of American magicians by showing O'Brien's early test reel, implying it was actual documentary footage. He later apologized for his hoax. Lost World's writer-director Harry Hoyt asked Willis O'Brien to help him create a follow-up dinosaur feature. Despite years of development, this lost epic was never produced.
The number of unrealized Willis O'Brien projects is sort of mythic in its proportions, I guess. There's famous projects like War Eagles, which sounds amazing and would have been wonderful. He had all sorts of films featuring dinosaurs and creatures. Guanji, which Ray Harryhausen himself eventually made. The Willis O'Brien project that never was, that's most closely associated with King Kong, is a project called Creation.
Creation was sort of the prototype to King Kong. It wasn't ever actually finished as a complete film, but it had many of the ideas that eventually would come to fruition in King Kong.
Creation was a new project at RKO that was going to be the most ambitious thing that Willis O'Brien had ever done. O'Brien was working in a shed off in the corner of the RKO lot, sort of his private project, and it was consuming a lot of the studio's money.
Creation probably would have cost over $1 million, would have been the biggest budget film at RKO, but as the Depression got worse and worse, they found that there's no way you could sell enough tickets at 10 cents a piece to make money on $1 million film.
RKO had invested over $100,000, which at that time was a huge amount of money. I mean, a big movie in 1933 cost $200,000, and so $100,000 had been spent on shooting a few minutes of Creation. RKO were very nearly bankrupt, and David O. Selznick, who became the head of the studio, brought Merian Cooper on board as a production executive to basically look very closely at the slate of pictures that RKO was making.
Cooper actually came to Hollywood and told Selznick straight out, I'll come and I'll help you, but I want to make my gorilla picture. Giant terror gorilla, as he put it. And there's this famous memo, or this memo I got to read, where he, after seeing Creation, basically said he hated the story, he hated the footage they had of Creation, but something went off in his head, a light bulb.
And it became clear to Merian C. Cooper that at last Willis O'Brien provided the technical efficiency to realize what up till then was only a mental conception he had.
Worried that he might lose the years of work he had put into Creation, Obie began designs to convince Cooper that stop-motion animation could make his giant ape appear any size he wanted. What he didn't know was that Cooper already had plans to use O'Brien's staff, techniques, and miniatures to help him bring to life his story. then called The Beast.
And there's actually a very interesting document that survives that is Willis O'Brien's contract, where it's the moment in time where he signs off from creation and he signs on to King Kong. The Beast blended with creation and became King Kong.
So a lot of scenes from creation, designs from creation, actually filtered into King Kong.
There are conceptual illustrations from creation that show a creature called an arsenitherium knocking people off a log into a chasm. And there's also a photograph of the arsenitherium and the log with sailors on the log. You also have the pterodactyl carrying the girl away.
Cooper's dream project, Production 601, went on to the RKO production schedule in January of 1932. Cooper allocated a healthy portion of the budget for construction of sets for Kong. At the same time, production of Cooper and Schoedsack's The Most Dangerous Game was already underway.
They had a beautiful jungle set built there at the RKO Pathé lot. And at the same time, Cooper was trying to make his test reel for King Kong. And so what he would do is he would use the sets from Most Dangerous Game.
In addition to The Most Dangerous Game being refurbished and used for Kong, the cast was also pulling double duty.
He used a couple of the key people, Fay Wray and Robert Armstrong.
All right, old chap. Pretty well shaken up, I guess, huh?
Coming out of it now, thanks.
We know just how it feels, don't we?
Indeed we do.
Cooper had found a way to shoot a test reel for Kong, a reel of film that would have to be spectacular enough to impress skeptical executives. While this scenario worked well for Cooper, it was Fay Wray who would be put through the ringer.
Cooper bragged that he had Fay Wray working 24 hours a day. She would put on the blonde wig for Kong and take it off for Most Dangerous Game. And there would be arguments between Cooper and Schoedsack as to who would have the set and when, and Schoedsack would hide out in the editing room from time to time so that Cooper couldn't find him and, argue with him over things. And so the partnership that worked so well in the jungle didn't work quite as well on set.
By the time The Most Dangerous Game was in the can, Cooper had convinced Schoedsack to co-direct Kong if his test reel proved a success.
The test reel was shown to the executives, and that is what sold them on making King Kong.
Cooper had done it, but with an exorbitant budget, some execs still tried to block the film until production head David O. Selznick stepped in and officially greenlit the project. Production 601 was a go, but Cooper still didn't have a finished script he was happy with. In late 1931, British novelist Edgar Wallace had been brought in to write the first draft of Kong under the working title of The Beast. Wallace's efforts yielded a 110-page script. Although it was drastically different than the final film, many elements of Wallace's storyline remain.
Denham is on a totally different boat, and he is looking for animals for a live show, and they stop on the island just in time to throw the gas bombs and knock King Kong out and then take him back to the city.
Wallace's cinematic sequence had Kong in New York, but chained up and on display in a circus. Kong manages to escape and hovers over the New York skyline, ultimately landing on the rooftop of the Empire State Building. Instead of biplanes attacking Kong, he would be struck down and killed by lightning. Before he could begin revisions to the script, Wallace fell ill and died on February 10, 1932, from complications due to pneumonia. Cooper then hired James Creelman, a celebrated action-adventure writer who had already worked with Cooper on the script for The Most Dangerous Game. Creelman's first draft, delivered mid-March and entitled The Eighth Wonder, failed to capture the key themes Cooper wanted, but production couldn't wait, and Cooper needed to begin assembling his cast.
Bruce Cabot was a waiter, I think at Perino's or something, that someone had spotted, a talent scout had spotted, and brought him over to the RKO, put him under contract, and said, maybe this guy will work out. And, King Kong was his first huge vehicle.
With Cabot on board, casting focused on finding the perfect Carl Denham.
Armstrong was under contract to RKO, was making The Most Dangerous Game at the same time. And the strange thing about that was he was playing a very, milk with toast, quiet, mealy-mouthed guy, he played a drunk and a guy that couldn't lead, a group of ants, much less Carl Denham. And then he would go to the next stage the next day and play this guy with all this vitality and, a great leader and real crazy, and the guy who gets the idea to bring King Kong back to New York.
Fay Wray had already appeared in Cooper's test reel, which led her to be cast in King Kong.
Fay Wray was on a huge roll at the time she made King Kong. As a matter of fact, she was in 11 movies that year, including 2 for Michael Curtiz's horror movies at Warner Brothers.
When Cooper approached Fay Wray with the news, he wasn't exactly forthcoming about her leading man.
He said, "You're going to have the tallest, darkest leading man in Hollywood." And then he told me something about the story of King Kong. But when he first told me, I was thinking that at that time about Cary Grant, because I liked him very, very much, and I, having done a play with him in New York. Well, who wouldn't?
Ray was a natural brunette, but with Kong as her co-star, she felt the character of Ann Darrow should be a blonde.
Well, it was pretty obvious that I should be blonde because Kong was a big, tall, dark, so-called leading man. And I knew that it was right to be blonde. So I went to the Max Factor studio, shop where they have wigs, and I chose the wig for myself.
With the principal cast members locked, Obie and his team of artists and technicians finished building the various incarnations of Kong. Sculptor Marcel Delgado and his brother Victor created the stop-motion puppets, the oversized hand and foot, and the life-size bust of Kong. Kong's physicality was beginning to take shape. Cooper was still struggling with Creelman's draft, but as fast as Cooper wanted to integrate new ideas, Creelman had trouble figuring out how to incorporate them all.
And James Creelman at a certain point said, "You know, Coop, there's only so many things you can shove into a story to have it make sense." He was out.
Desperate, Cooper turned to a close friend and colleague, Ruth Rose. Even though she had never penned a screenplay before, Cooper asked her to rework Creelman's script. Give the spirit of the real Cooper-Schoedsack expedition, Cooper told her, and she did. Rose made sure all the plot points were set up prior to Kong making his first appearance on screen.
I've always admired that in the screenplay of Kong, is to build up this tension. What is Kong? Who is he? Why should we worry about him? And the fact that they had a motion picture company who went there to photograph something that had never been photographed before. It all pointed to that.
Merian Cooper said to me, "Scream, Fay, scream for your life." Well, who wouldn't? Even if you could only just imagine a giant creature like of that kind, you know? So that's exactly what he said. Scream for your life.
The blend of live action and stop-motion animation began to take shape. The challenge to make the process seamless is evident in the climactic New York sequence that begins when Kong makes his Broadway debut. The interior was filmed in LA's old Shrine Auditorium. The principals enacted their scenes on the stage before an audience of extras. Kong was photographed separately on a miniature stage and was matted in.
It's made of rubber, so that it was pliable, and they could put the fingers around my waist when I stood on the floor in the studio. They put the fingers around me as tight as they could to hold me, and sometimes I would say, "You know, that's tight enough, that's tight enough."
Kong's rise to the top of the Empire State Building was also handled in miniature, but the airplanes were real New York Navy-based biplanes. "We made 'em, we should kill the son of a bitch ourselves," said Cooper, so he and Schoedsack gave themselves cameos aboard the plane that would fatally wound Kong.
The biplanes that attack Kong are a combination of live-action airplanes and miniatures, and several different sizes of miniatures, so that they would have small planes in the background and big planes in the foreground. Sometimes the live-action airplanes were composited with King Kong, so that there may even be a few scenes where there's both live-action and miniature planes.
With those final New York sequences complete, King Kong's live action was just the beginning. Hitting the emotional beats of Cooper and Schoedsack's fantasy would demand the creation of the first movie star who was a visual effect.
Kong was a groundbreaking film. It was the absolute beginning of the big spectacle in which visual effects was used to drive the story, to create the main title character of the film and to create, you know, not just spectacle but emotion.
King Kong was the first time that an animated character was a main part of the actual production.
One of the reasons it's a terrific picture is because of the star turn that this little hunk of foam rubber and rabbit fur is able to do on screen.
You believe in him, and there's very moving scenes where you say, "Oh, it's as if whoever was directing this really was inside that puppet."
You go there thinking, you know, you're going to see this monster tear apart, you know, New York City, and you end up really feeling for this guy when he gets killed.
You cry when Kong falls off the Empire State Building because he is such a well-realized visual effect. And that is really the first time in filmmaking that ever occurred.
Kong was a very collaborative effort. But if Willis O'Brien hadn't done his job right, nothing anybody else did would have mattered. Because the whole conceit of that was, let's make the audience believe this ape is real.
Cooper and Schoedsack, when they were making King Kong, wanted a considerable degree of secrecy.
The production of King Kong was kept a complete mystery, especially in terms of the visual effects. They didn't want people walking into the theater thinking the eighth wonder of the world was 18 inches tall. The information that was released to the public was completely wrong.
Like a man in a gorilla suit crawling up the side of the building, Fay Wray being cut out and put in the hand frame by frame. None of these things were the way they actually did it. They not only didn't want people to know how the effects were done, but they also didn't allow any behind-the-scenes footage in the animation rooms.
I have never found an interview with Willis O'Brien, and I have tried very hard to find one. And how sad is that we don't have the ability to hear Willis's ideas about the inception of his craft and what his motivations were.